A woman was handcuffed by police in the middle of the airport. She didn't scream or struggle, but her eyes were as cold as knives. Two white policemen held her arms tightly, sneering. One of them leaned down and whispered, "You know the rules, right? If you want this to go away, just behave." In that moment, everything stopped. The two policemen had no idea that the black woman they had insulted and arrested held the power to destroy their careers. But wait, how did it get to this point? Why was that woman handcuffed in the middle of the airport? And what will happen to these two abusive and prejudiced police officers? Let's go back to the beginning, from the moment she stepped off the plane until justice was served. Vanessa stepped off the Air France Boeing 777 with a confident air, a shiny black Samsonite suitcase in one hand and an expensive Chanel handbag in the other. After a week of attending a criminal justice conference in Paris, she was finally back home in New York. She took a deep breath as she entered the immigration area of JFK International Airport. The atmosphere here felt very different from Paris, noisier, more urgent, and a little tense. There were long lines for passport control, constant announcements, and a rush of passengers dragging their bags away. Vanessa wore a tailored suit that accentuated her elegant and powerful figure. The suit was custom-made by a famous designer, combined with shiny black Louboutin heels. She wore a luxurious Rolex watch on her left wrist, creating the demeanor of a successful woman. Her sharp eyes exuded intelligence and uncompromising. Vanessa is not only a successful woman, but also a federal prosecutor who has stood in court against the most dangerous criminals. She has helped put drug dealers, corrupt officials, and even corrupt police officers behind bars. But right now, she is simply a woman returning home after a long business trip. As she stepped out of the immigration gate, two airport police officers, Mark Reynolds and Jason Miller, quickly noticed her. Both were white men in their early 40s, wearing airport police uniforms complete with gun belts, handcuffs, and radios. Reynolds, the taller one with short blonde hair, glanced at Miller, tilting his chin toward Vanessa. "Look," he said quietly, but loud enough for his co-workers to hear. Miller smirked. "A black girl wearing designer clothes like that? I bet she's either some rich guy's girlfriend or has something illegal in her bag." Both officers had been doing this job long enough to realize that they could exploit stereotypes to target people they deemed suspicious. A black woman stepping out of business class, wearing expensive clothes. To them, that was not normal. Vanessa ignored the two police officers' questioning gazes as she continued toward the baggage claim. She was used to those looks, the suspicious, judgmental ones she'd seen countless times since she was a child. She remembers her days as a young girl living in the Bronx, where police officers would routinely stop black boys on the street for looking suspicious. As she grew up and pursued law, she vowed to fight to change that. But even now, as one of the country's top prosecutors, those stares have not changed. She looked straight ahead, keeping her steps confident, but she couldn't help but feel uncomfortable inside. She knew all too well what that kind of gaze would lead to. Mark Reynolds and Jason Miller exchanged glances, then decided to move forward to block Vanessa's path. Miller stepped forward, holding up his hand to signal her to stop. "Excuse me, ma'am. We need to check something." Vanessa paused, her sharp brown eyes fixed on him. "Check what?" Reynolds stepped up beside Miller, arms crossed, a half smile on his face. "A security check. It's routine." Vanessa frowned. "I went through customs. Everything was fine. Can you give me a good reason?" Miller shrugged, his tone still calm but meaningful. "We reserve the right to test anyone we see who is acting out." Vanessa tightened her grip on her bag, feeling anger rising inside her. She had seen too many situations like this, surprise searches targeting people of color without any justification. "Unusual signs?" she repeated, trying to keep her voice from exploding. Reynolds scanned her from head to toe, then sneered. "A well-dressed lady just stepped out of business class. That's not normal, is it?" Vanessa felt a chill run down her spine, not because she was afraid, but because of the rising anger. They made no effort to hide their prejudice. The atmosphere between them became tense. Some of the passengers around them started to pay attention, some looked away, some glanced curiously. Vanessa stood still, her eyes calm but not cold as she looked at the two police officers in front of her. She was used to this kind of prejudiced examination, but that did not mean she would accept it easily. Reynolds and Miller stood on either side, forming a pincer movement as if she were a dangerous suspect. Miller looked Vanessa up and down and smirked. "Where does a girl like you get this kind of money?" He glanced at her luxurious suit, the Chanel bag in her hand, and her expensive high heels, his tone full of sarcasm. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. She knew exactly what he meant. "What do you have in your bag?" Reynolds asked, his tone a little harsher than his colleagues. Vanessa did not flinch. She slowly adjusted her posture, straightened her shoulders, and stood more firmly, showing her confidence. "Can you tell me specifically why I was stopped?" Her voice was still calm, but there was an unmistakable hardness in it. Miller smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. "We're just doing our jobs. And people like you," he emphasized the last two words, "usually have something to check." Vanessa raised her eyebrows, her voice becoming sharper. "People like me? What do you mean?" Reynolds shrugged, trying to act like this was routine. "We reserve the right to search your luggage if we see anything suspicious." Vanessa crossed her arms, trying to control her breathing to keep her composure. "What's my red flag? Because I'm dressed nicely? Because I'm a black woman stepping out of business class? Or because you can't believe someone like me could legally buy these things?" Miller raised his eyebrows, taking a step back. It seemed he hadn't expected her to be so blunt. Reynolds was not about to back down. He pointed to her Chanel bag. "Open it. We need to see inside." Vanessa took a deep breath. "Do you have a search warrant?" Miller waved his hand as if the question were unimportant. "We don't need a warrant. This is an airport. We have the right to search if we have any suspicions." Vanessa didn't move. "Without orders, I'm under no obligation to open the bag." Her firmness seemed to unsettle the two policemen. Reynolds took a step forward, his face cold. "You refuse to cooperate?" Vanessa looked him straight in the eye. "I refuse to submit to a test that has no legal basis." Miller and Reynolds exchanged glances. The atmosphere between them was tense. Without further warning, Reynolds suddenly grabbed Vanessa's arm and twisted it behind her back. "You are under arrest for resisting an officer." His voice was cold. Vanessa staggered a little but kept her balance. Her heart pounded in her chest, not with fear, but with anger. "Let me go! You have no right to arrest me!" But her words had no effect. Miller quickly pulled the handcuffs from his belt and locked them around her wrists. The cold metal clanged across the crowded airport lobby. A commotion spread around. Some passengers took out their phones to record the scene. Some just stood there looking curious, but no one stepped forward to intervene. Vanessa felt her arms being pulled back behind her, her wrists aching from the tight metal cuffs. She was led through the crowd, eyes scanning her with a range of emotions: surprise, judgment, or indifference. A middle-aged woman standing nearby shook her head and whispered to the person next to her, "It must be another drug case." Vanessa gritted her teeth. She wanted to scream at everyone that she had done nothing wrong, that this was a blatant abuse of power, but she knew that protesting now would only make things worse. Reynolds and Miller dragged her through the customs area, leading to a separate inspection room. When they entered the room, Miller closed the door. Vanessa was pushed into the cold, hard chair by Reynolds in the small, cramped airport interrogation room. Her wrists were still cuffed behind her back, forcing her back to arch uncomfortably. Her sharp eyes stared at the two police officers in front of Reynolds and Miller. They stood facing each other as if this were a familiar game. Vanessa could see the smugness in Miller's eyes as he flipped through the notebook on the table, pretending to be busy. Reynolds leaned against the wall, arms crossed, an arrogant look on his face, as if he had won. Miller spoke first, his voice slow and full of meaning. "You know, lady, there are ways to make things a little easier. I'm sure you don't want to spend the whole day here over a little misunderstanding." Vanessa smiled faintly. She knew exactly what he wanted. They wanted her to bribe her way out. Reynolds stepped forward, hands on the table, looking down at her with calculating eyes. "We can forget all about this. We won't file a report into the system. But, you know, everything has its price." Vanessa was silent for a few seconds, keeping her expression calm. She looked straight into his eyes, then slowly curled her lips. "You just arrested a federal prosecutor without probable cause." A moment of deadly silence. Reynolds and Miller froze. Miller frowned, seemingly trying to process what he had just heard. Reynolds, who had always maintained a smug demeanor, blinked repeatedly, his lips pressed together. "What did you say?" Miller asked again, his voice no longer as arrogant as before. Vanessa tilted her head, her eyes cold. "I say, you just abused your power to arrest a federal prosecutor without any evidence. I am Vanessa Robinson, a prosecutor with the Federal Prosecutor's Office." Miller and Reynolds glanced at each other, tension starting to show on both of their faces. "You're making this up," Reynolds said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Vanessa gave a cold smile. "Oh, is that so? In that case, I'm sure you wouldn't mind if I made a phone call to my office?" Miller swallowed. He had heard the name Vanessa Robinson before, but he had never expected to find himself in a situation like this. The name was in the news a lot. One of the top federal prosecutors who had taken down major drug dealers and even investigated corrupt police officers. Reynolds, though frightened, tried to keep a straight face. "You can say whatever you want. We still need to check your background." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Great. Go ahead. But I warn you, every second you keep me here without a warrant, you're opening yourself up to a serious civil rights lawsuit." Just then, the door to the room burst open. A man in an airport uniform rushed in, panting. "Miss Robinson," the man said, clearly recognizing her. It was Anthony Diaz, an airport security officer Vanessa had worked with on a case a few years ago. Diaz scanned the room, Vanessa handcuffed, two officers standing across from him with stiff expressions. He immediately turned to Reynolds and Miller, eyes blazing. "What the hell are you guys doing?" Diaz nearly shouted. Reynolds stammered. She's acting suspiciously. She's a federal prosecutor, you idiot," Diaz interrupted, pulling out his phone. "I'll call your boss right away." Miller panicked. "There's no need to make such a big deal out of it, man." But Diaz left the room, dialing a number as he walked. Less than 3 minutes later, the door opened again. A man in a high-ranking police uniform walked in. He had the insignia of a lieutenant pinned to his lapel. Lieutenant David Marshall. Marshall glanced at the situation before him, then turned to Vanessa with regretful eyes. "Oh my God. Miss Robinson, I am so sorry about this." He turned back to Reynolds and Miller, his face red with anger. "Let her go immediately." Miller shakily pulled out the key and quickly unlocked Vanessa's handcuffs. She turned her wrist, feeling a slight pain from the red marks on her skin. Reynolds, who had been so smug a moment ago, now stood frozen, his face as white as a sheet. I'm really sorry," he stuttered, his voice filled with worry. Miller was equally confused. "We don't know. We're just following the procedure." Vanessa looked at the two of them with icy eyes. She didn't say anything for a few seconds, just letting the silence drag on, making the two policemen even more panicked. "Sorry," she finally said, her voice even but carrying a terrifying weight. "Do you think I would accept a simple apology?" Marshall swallowed. "Miss Robinson, I assure you this matter will be seriously investigated. I will personally report it to my superiors." Vanessa slowly stood up, adjusting her suit. Her eyes never left the two policemen. "I want a formal investigation." Miller and Reynolds turned pale. They knew their careers had just hit rock bottom. The next day, Vanessa's case was all over the media. Major news outlets like CNN, NBC, and the New York Times all ran headlines. "Federal prosecutor unjustly arrested by JFK police." Videos of Vanessa being handcuffed in the airport also went viral. In the video, her face remained calm, but her eyes were cold and angry. In contrast, the image of two police officers, Mark Reynolds and Jason Miller, blatantly abusing their power caused a stir on social media. Angry comments were everywhere. "This is why we need police reform." "This is shameful. Why is this still happening in 2025? If she wasn't a prosecutor, she would have been framed and imprisoned by now." Several politicians also spoke out about the incident, calling for a transparent investigation. Many human rights organizations and anti-racism activists immediately joined in, demanding justice for Vanessa. At the New York Police Department, pressure was mounting on Chief Michael Carter. His office was swarmed by reporters. An emergency press conference was held. Chief Carter stepped up to the podium, his face heavy. He knew this situation could not be covered up. "We have suspended the two officers involved in the incident pending an investigation. The police department is committed to reviewing this matter in a fair and transparent manner." A reporter raised his hand and asked loudly, "Sir, the airport camera footage shows that these two officers not only made an illegal arrest, but also showed signs of demanding bribes. What action will the police department take?" Chief Carter swallowed, knowing there was no avoiding this question. "We will cooperate with the prosecutor's office to handle the case in accordance with the law." This event not only affected the reputation of the police department, but also sparked a wave of demands for law enforcement reform. Protests began to appear in many places in the city, demanding transparency and justice for Vanessa Robinson. At the federal prosecutor's office, Vanessa's team quickly gathered evidence to bring the case to light. Airport security camera footage clearly showed. Reynolds and Miller had been following Vanessa since the moment she stepped out of immigration. There was no good reason for them to approach her, other than the fact that she was a well-dressed black woman. When she refused to open the bag without a search warrant, they immediately used force, handcuffed her, and dragged her away. The conversation in the interrogation room was also recorded. In it, Miller's voice was clearly ambiguous as he hinted at letting it go if Vanessa would behave. In addition, there were many witnesses at the airport willing to testify. Some passengers filmed the whole incident and were willing to provide the video to the court. A month later, the trial officially began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, activists, and the public were all interested in the outcome of the case. Vanessa entered the courtroom with poise. Today, she was no longer the victim, but the prosecutor standing up for justice. She was the key witness in the case, ready to face the two men who had abused their power to arrest her. Reynolds and Miller sat in the dock, looking worried. This time, they didn't have the same arrogant demeanor they had had that day at the airport. They were both wearing dark suits, trying to look serious and apologetic. But that didn't change the fact that they had blatantly abused their power. The prosecutor's lawyer stepped forward and opened the trial with sharp arguments. "Today, we are not just dealing with two police officers. We are dealing with a system that is riddled with bias and abuse. If these two officers can do this to a federal prosecutor, what happens to ordinary people?" Vanessa stood up, took a deep breath, and then boldly told the court what had happened that day. She recounted every detail, from Reynolds's contemptuous look when he asked her, "Where does a girl like you get all this money?" to the moment her wrists were cuffed without any legal reason. After Vanessa finished her testimony, the prosecution presented video evidence and witness statements. It was too clear to deny. Finally, after many days of trial, the jury returned a verdict. Mark Reynolds and Jason Miller were sentenced to 6 years in prison on charges of abuse of power, illegal arrest, Demand bribes. As the verdict was announced, Reynolds bowed his head, and Miller closed his eyes tightly, as if trying to escape reality. Vanessa looked at them, without any pity in her eyes. This was not only her personal victory, but also a victory for all the victims who had been treated unfairly and had no chance to speak up. The trial ended with applause from those present. Justice had been served. But for Vanessa, the fight against racism and police abuse continues. After the trial, Mark Reynolds and Jason Miller were officially sent to federal prison to serve 6 years. The day they walked through the prison doors was the day they lost everything: their careers, their honor, and their freedom. Life in the camp was not easy for them. As news of the case spread, other inmates quickly realized who they were. The fact that the two policemen had abused their power and were now being held as common criminals became a sensation in the camp. At his first meal, Reynolds walked into the dining hall with a tray of food, but no one gave him a seat. A group of black prisoners stared at him, their faces full of meaning. Miller tried to find a secluded corner to sit down, but was immediately pushed in front of him by another prisoner. "A policeman? Now he's just a prisoner." A voice rang out mockingly. Reynolds clenched his fists around the tray, but he knew there was nothing he could do. He had no power here, no weapon, no badge to shield him. Isolation was inevitable. Their former colleagues were no longer on their side. The two were now losers, living in regret and fear for the next 6 years. The Vanessa Robinson case was not just a scandal. It created a strong wave of reform in the police system. After Reynolds and Miller were convicted, the NYPD was forced to undertake a sweeping internal overhaul. Policies on police conduct were tightened. Racial bias and civil rights training were made mandatory. In addition, a new bill has been proposed to increase police accountability. The law would require all officers to turn on their body cameras at all times while on duty, and any abuse of power found would be dealt with more severely. Human rights groups also used the case to push for broader changes in the justice system. Discussions about racial discrimination in law enforcement became more heated than ever. It all started when 2 police officers at JFK Airport decided to abuse their power over a woman they didn't know. Vanessa didn't just fight for justice, she became a symbol of anti-racism in the law enforcement system. In the weeks following the trial, she was invited to appear on major television shows to talk about the case. She appeared on 60 Minutes, Good Morning America, and The Daily Show, sharing her views on police abuse. During an interview on CNN, the host asked her, "Do you think this incident has changed anything?" Vanessa paused for a moment, thinking, then replied with a determined look. "It can't completely eradicate systemic racism, but at least it sends a clear message. No one is above the law. No one can abuse their power with impunity." Her words quickly became a powerful statement. Black rights organizations began citing her in their campaigns for justice reform. Vanessa also received many letters from strangers expressing support and appreciation for her courage. One letter from a young woman in Chicago read, "You don't know me, but your story inspired me to pursue law. Thank you for standing up, not just for yourself, but for all those who have no voice." Vanessa read the letter, feeling a mixture of pride and emotion. She never thought that something that happened to her could have such a powerful effect. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.